It's been exciting and fun to look into this particular topic. But just so you know, if you look online for Spike Fosaurus, he is absolutely being annihilated. The attacks are coming. It's crazy. But see, that's what happens when you don't have any evidence, you don't have any ammunition to compare, then they resort to character assassination. So it's really interesting to see he's just so cool, so mellow, so kicked back, and it doesn't, it's just part of something that you just have to accept when you step out for the Lord. So pray for him. And as I said this morning, we cannot function without that prayer support. Tonight, we're going to get into a little bit more detail. And as John said, we just got these DVDs. It's a two-part series, and they're both pretty long. And I think one of them's like almost an hour and a half, and the other's an hour and 20 minutes. And you can get those through Answers in Genesis or through Spike Fosaurus through his website. We're obviously ordering more. That's how we support our ministry, is to be able to sell the books and DVDs and things. But tonight we're going to get into the math and the empirical evidence. We're going to start with the National Academy of Science definition of science, and then let's hold the science up to the very definition that they themselves have come up with. But I thought I would just start off by just reading you some of the things. This was in the USA Today, and just so you can get a feel for how the students are just being force-fed information or material as if it were fact, and they are discouraged from even questioning. But this one here, new evidence discovered, universe ripples. It says, in a landmark achievement, scientists say they have seen ripples in the wave of the universe, which would provide the first direct evidence. What? Do you catch what that's? I remember standing up here several years ago telling you about the COBE, the cosmic background radiation, which proved the expansion in the Big Bang. Well, what happened to that proof? If this is the proof. See, that was only proof till this proof came about, until they can figure out another proof to prove their proof. And that's pretty much how it works, circular reasoning. It said this would provide the first direct evidence that the universe underwent massive, incomprehensible, fast growth spurt in its earliest infancy. Now here's the kicker. It says, if the new findings are confirmed, they could very well earn their discoverers the Nobel Prize. Do you catch where this is going? See, to remain current, you have to get your name out there. You have to find the oldest, biggest, newest, whatever, at whatever cost, if you are to compete in this absolutely jungle out there. And as I said, there's as long as I have been in school, from the earliest high school right on through college, there's been two competing entities out there, and they're at war. I mean, I have literally witnessed scientists. Sometimes you get that impression of these nerdy little scientists. Well, I'll tell you, some of them pack a powerful punch. I've seen them punching each other out, bloody noses, broken glasses, fat lips in the lab over who's right. Unless they think there might be one of those Christians, those creationists, and all of a sudden now they're a united front, you ignorant Christians. But it goes on, it says, the new research provides a glimpse of the universe just after the Big Bang, when it was an infinitesimal fraction of a second old and smaller than the period at the end of a sentence. Now, that's the kind of faith you have to have. And yet, as Christians, when we have the best documented piece of literature in the history of mankind, archaeologically, scientifically, literaturely, I mean, you can't have faith in that, but you can believe in the entire universe that became as small as the period at the end of a sentence. But what was it that condensed into this period? Nobody knows. They don't even want you to ask that question. It says, to explain how the universe evolved from that state to the form it has today, scientists have posited an event just after the Big Bang called inflation, when space expanded violently and explosively in the merest sliver of a second. Well, how would you empirically prove that? But here it is. It gets better. It says, the prize was won at last by a collaboration among scientists from across the United States. The telescope detected a telltale curl in the ancient microwaves, a pattern that is the fingerprint of gravitational waves. The finding should boost the fortunes of the inflation theory. You see what I was talking about? See, we had the steady state theory, and they were pretty much winning, actually. And now, because of that, and the fact that these folks had been kind of pushed to the back burner, we now have the new evidence. Of course, all of these scientists had been looking through the same telescope at the same place for all of these years, but nobody saw it. It says the finding should boost the fortunes of the inflation theory, which some astrophysicists have dismissed as inadequate. You see, well, at least they mentioned that, there's a huge section of the scientific community that dismisses the inflation theory totally anyway. But see, the students aren't told that. And unfortunately, most of the teachers in the high school level and even in some college levels don't know this stuff. It says, the scientists behind the new results say their data, which they are submitting to a scientific journal now, are strong enough, they hope it is strong enough to hold up to scientific scrutiny. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack. I just heard that on the news. They're looking for another needle out in the ocean. But see, that's the type of stuff that's being force-fed, handed to the students as if it were a fact. And I mentioned this morning, and John touched on it, where was God when he created light? And, everything about this says, expansion means it's stretching out. So if the light's coming this way and stretching that way, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But dark matter and dark energy are the cure-alls. And in a little bit, you're going to see, like I told you this morning, the big impact hypothesis. When all else fails, you resort to the large impact. And that explains everything. So every time you run into a problem, you can't explain something, you don't have enough physical, empirical evidence, you resort to an explosion. I mean, it's absurd, but that's what I believed. But see, the concept of dark matter, it says the simulations in computer models. Any of you who are computer literate, you know that you can model anything. You can model anything. I can get any result I want, depending on the parameters of what I model, what I put in there. So the main, tool to try to keep us on an even keel and as honest as we can is that you start with a constant. You have to have a constant to get in. So, but if you put, faulty information in your computer model in one side, and you model it to infinity, what are you going to get on the other end? Faulty information. And if your constant isn't constant, then you're really in trouble. So what they resort to is the speed of light, the Hubble constant, all of these constants, which we're going to take a look at in just a few minutes, which are not constant. But students don't know this. The teachers don't know this. So we have to put our faith in dark matter, dark energy. And here it says, the simulations are based on mind-blowing concept. Some kind of mystery material which can't be seen and has come to be known as dark matter outweighs all of the visible material in the universe by at least 9 to 1. I had to read that again. Did you catch what that just said? Some kind of mystery material which can't be seen or detected, which known as dark matter, outweighs all of the visible empirical evidence 9 to 1. So we're basing our entire belief system on invisible, non-detectable material. But that's okay. And you know what? Science, it does change. And it's okay for us to have different opinions. That's legal. And it's okay if they would just say so. Some scientists believe. But to force feed the kids as if there's no other explanation, this is fact, don't question it, that is wrong. That is just not right. And it certainly isn't right for scientists, for teachers, or speakers to stand up and inflict our opinion on you as fact. No, that is not right. Let's just do like I said this morning where I showed you Michael Roos, who says we're talking about two faith-based religions. And that's legal. And that's exactly what they are. Let's see, but the whole idea was to call creationism, religion, metaphysics, to keep it out of the classroom. Well, let's stop that. Let's just teach everything. And if you have to, let's just call them both religions, then we can teach everything. Instead of this science versus religion. That is not true. Who created science? God. This is not a science book. But I got news for you. Every single time God's word touches on science, it is absolute correct. And he tells us what is holding it all together. Not some invisible dark matter. He, Jesus, holds all creation together. And if he's big enough to create it, he can certainly hold it together, folks. Here's another one. I thought it goes on. It says, the invisible grip of dark matter. The most pervasive theory about the origin of galaxies depends on the behavior of particles no one has ever seen. Well, I had a friend of mine sent me this little clip, and I always like to start with it because I think it's funny. And these people go to this much trouble to bring you a good can of salmon. I thought I'd go to a little bit of trouble to bring you a lecture. And so watch the footwork on this bear. See, it says, we at John West endure the worst to bring you the best. So here we go. Hang on. Math. And see, even the scientists know this. Astronomy magazine, how math drives the universe. But yet it's so funny how conveniently we leave out the math, or we mess with the math when it comes to creation and evolution. The math, you can mess with a lot of things. And as I have said before, I love ologies. You know, my PhD is in evolutionary biology, but even within that ology, I have a specialty in another ology called herpetology. Then I have a degree in geology. I love ology. Ologies just means the study of. It's when we add the math to our ology that we find out how well our ologies are doing. And guys, if we were honest with the math, then we could see how well our ologies are doing. And see, the laws of probability, when it's applied to the science, and in fact, getting here tonight, you use the laws of probability. What are the odds of, you getting from point A to point B? Every day you use math, you use laws of probability. If you went to the doctor and he says, I got some bad news, you have a brain tumor. But if you go over to hospital A, you've got a 60% chance of total recovery. Whew, oh, that's good news. If you go over to hospital B, you got a 98% chance of total recovery. Now, does it take a rocket scientist to figure out which one you're going to go to? But you see, that's how we do with the science. We accept, or the students are expected to accept Darwinian evolution, the evolution of our cosmos, as fact in spite of the evidence. The math is so overwhelming. That's why they shy away from it. But yet, we know that the math is what drives science. In 1962, when I was a freshman in high school, the mathematical odds of Darwinian evolution, or any type of evolution, was this. I was told that the concept of impossibility comes into play at 10 to the 50th power. So the occurrence of any event where the chances are beyond 1 in 10 followed by 50 zeros is an event which we can state with certainty will never happen. No matter how much time is allotted, no matter how many conceivable opportunities could exist for the event to take place. That's from the scientific community. That's Emil Borel. Emil is a famous mathematician and scientist. Do you ever hear that? And I had this told to me in high school and in college. I had teachers say, oh, well, given enough time, anything is possible. That is that's not true. The laws of probability come to a screeching halt at 10 to the 50th power. But that was in 1962, and at that point, see, I jokingly tell the students, an eighth grader can do more research in 10 minutes than I could do in a month when I was in school. I actually had to go to the library. But what are those odds? And in 1962, we didn't have computers, we didn't have laptops and all of these iPads and iPhones and smartphones. We didn't even have smart teachers half the time. But that was in 1962. So what happened then in the 20 years between 1960s and the 80s? The computer revolution. We can do mathematical calculations today that Einstein and Borel and Max Planck and all these great scientists and mathematicians couldn't even imagine the calculations that we can do today. We're finding new prime numbers. So then what happened to this number with 50 zeros between 1962 and 1980? And that 20-year leap, was it exponential? Did it jump a factor of 10, which is astronomical? Did it go from 50 zeros? See, everybody in this room could write that number, 50 zeros. But in that 20 years, look what happened with the advent of the computer. The likelihood of the formation of life from inanimate matter is 1 to a number with 40,000 zeros after it. Folks, it didn't jump 50 zeros, 100, it jumped to 40,000 zeros. It It is big enough to bury Darwin and the whole theory of evolution. There is no primeval soup, neither on this planet nor any other, and if the beginnings of life were not random, they must have therefore been the product of purposeful intelligence. Try writing that number. 40,000 zeros. That is the odds of just one random act of spontaneous generation of evolution. That is the odds of an infinitesimal period exploding into a universe. That was just from the time I was a freshman in high school to the 80s. Well, what do you think that number is today at 2014? Well, it didn't just jump again just a little bit. Take a look at this. And this is what we expect kids to believe, that this all just happened from an explosion. The anthropic principle, which allows life, allows us to exist on this planet. The anthropic principle, simply stated, is the fine-tuning of the physical universe to allow life to exist on this planet. In order to reach this mind-boggling degree of fine-tuning with so many different parameters, smacks of some form of intelligent design. According to Roger Penrose, another great mathematician and scientist, it had to have been accurate to within 1 part in 10 to 10 to the 123rd power, and that is a number so vast that it couldn't be written on a piece of paper the size of the entire visible universe. Now that's using the math. But see, we're still expected, the kids, to buy into this. And they say that we are naive and we're ignorant because we believe the Bible. 10 to 10 to the 123rd power. And by the way, if you have a computer big enough to do that calculation on, if you happen to be at a university or something, when you actually do that calculation, it comes out to a sideways 8. You know what that is? That's infinity. That is the odds of just one. And for evolution to have occurred, we had to have multiple acts to account for the species and the universe, all of this. But you see, as I said this morning, we only have 2 choices. Man's word or God's word. It's not a complicated thing. It's not like we have all these decisions and you can make all these notes. No, it's just 2. God's word or man's word. And what does God tell us? Matthew 24:4, God says it's by faith that we will know, and that man will deceive you. Jesus took time out of the day to sit down and talk with his disciples and tell them, take heed that no man deceive you. So why then, in spite of these odds, and in spite of what God tells us, we put our faith in man's word? And folks, I see young Christian men and women doing that. If you don't build that foundation, when they run into teachers like I was in that university, I am heartbroken when I see these young Christian students cop out for man's word. They're so concerned about how they're viewed by the world. 10 to 10 to the 123rd power. That is the odds. So if you want to put your faith there, that is your choice. That's legal. See, God created us with the ability to make choices. And guess what one of your choices is? You can choose not to believe in God. And if you choose not to believe in God, I will feel sorry for you. I'll pray for you, but I can't argue with you. That is your right. But if you tell me you don't believe in God because of all of the scientific evidence, now I'll argue with you. Because there isn't any. You can choose not to believe in God because you don't want to be accountable to God like I did, but you can't try to use some trumped up, phony scientific nonsense. You will choose to believe in man's word in spite of the evidence, not because of it. And we're going to talk about the definition of science and what is empirical. See, there's some pretty important words in science. Theory, hypothesis, and law. The state of California changed the definition of the word theory, so that it now says in their science framework that theory is proven. It is a fact. So now they can say the theory of evolution is a fact by definition, but not by evidence. See, when you take your hypothesis and develop it into a working model, and then you build your theory, and then you take the theory and you can let it be peer-reviewed by other scientists to where it becomes a law, that is empirical. But I find it absurd that the students are being baffled by the scientists, their teachers, because when it comes to a law, like the second law of thermodynamics, which is a law, and they try to say, well, it's a closed system, open system. Have you ever heard of the solar system? It's our solar system. That's a closed system. They try to say, well, the sun is generating the energy so it can. No, that doesn't work. It's just gobbledygook. But the second law of thermodynamics is an empirical law directly observable in nature and in experimentation. The law implies that the direction of all natural processes towards states of disorder. A natural system degenerate when left to themselves. Huxley, who is a compadre of Darwin, states that evolution is an irreversible process which leads to greater variety and more complex order. So his assertion, and the assertion of the science teachers and the secular scientific community, is that evolution occurs in direct conflict, contradicts a law of science. His assertion contradicts the second law of thermodynamics. Either evolution has occurred in spite of the second law, or evolution has not occurred at all. But see, the students aren't even given that opportunity. The second law of thermodynamics is the law of entropy. Evolution states that it can only go in one direction, and you go from a simple order to a more complex. That is absolutely scientifically impossible. But, well, you can't argue with science. No, yes, you can. The idea, now, this is right out of Scientific American, one of the science journals. I read this, and I couldn't believe what I was reading, because it's been kind of subtle, the deception. But follow along with me and look what this is telling. In writing, and you can go check it yourself, the idea of inflation, which I just read to you, we've proven the inflation, we've now proven the Big Bang. The idea of inflation is so compelling that cosmologists, including me, routinely describe it to students, journalists, and the public as an established fact. Do you catch what they just said? Even though we know it is not an established fact, it does not adhere to the scientific principles, it doesn't adhere to the math, we know that it's not a fact, it is merely a theory, a speculation, a hypothesis. It is taught to you, the journalists, the public, and your students as if it were a fact. To me, that's a lie. Even I know that what I'm about to tell you is not true, but I'm going to tell you it is. That is absurd, folks, and that is wrong. It says, something peculiar has happened to the inflationary theory in the 30 years since Alan Guth introduced it. Over the years, the evidence for inflation has become weaker. But the students aren't told that. We're just told that we now have evidence. Based on what? Invisible, undetectable matter. That's in writing. See, it's just in your face, students. And don't dare question it. But yet, if science says that it has to be empirical to be part of science, and we Christians, we can't be part of science because we depend on faith, Just like we said, we are talking about two faith-based religions here, folks. How can cosmologists claim that the Big Bang Theory agrees with observations as they routinely do? Theorists are not unaware of the problems. The only people that are unaware of the problems are the teachers and the students. When I interviewed teachers to teach at my school up in Santa Cruz, Christian men and women who college graduates, they had no idea that there was any problems with the Big Bang or anything else. But it says they're not unaware of the problems, but they have what? Faith that they can resolve these problems. Many remain hopeful, even though they have been wrestling with this issue for the past 25 years and have yet to come up with a plausible solution. If we don't have a plausible solution, why are we teaching it as if it were a fact? The scientific community knows it, as I showed you this morning. Right on the cover, the Big Bang Theory. Why our best explanation of how the universe evolved must be fixed or replaced. Why would you fix it or replace it if it wasn't broken? But see, the students aren't being told this. They're unaware that there are any problems. Now, after the Big Bang, we're told life spontaneously rose from ordinary chemicals. But even the most ardent evolutionists will admit that they cannot explain how this happened. And I showed you another quote of Richard Dawkins. He was asked this question. When asked this question, asked whether he had any idea how life started, Richard Dawkins replied as follows: "No, nor has anybody." We have no idea how life started, but it's being taught as a fact, and we can't teach creation in the classroom because that's metaphysical and based on faith. You see why I'm up here? That's what we need to let the students know, that there are alternatives. Let's give them all of the information, and then let them make the choice, using the brains that God has given them. Not only can nobody, it says, do you know how life got started? No, and no one else does. But I just showed you this. These are the odds of life getting started by itself, 10 to 10 to the 123rd power. So even if you let it go, that's absurd. According to most models for the formation of the universe and our solar system, look at this. Many of the observable objects we see should not exist at all. And there is no satisfactory scientific explanation for their existence. That's out of Astronomy magazine. So the models tell them that it shouldn't even exist. But there it is. That's why I think God has a sense of humor, because every time they look into the sky, every time they look into a telescope, there is, God says, for signs and wonders. They shouldn't exist by all scientific and mathematical odds, but there they are. And so since they're there, it is, I know God's just laughing daily when he hears how scientists are trying to explain the fact that they're there. I showed you this morning the order, and I talked about the terrestrial planets, Mercury, Earth, Venus. These are Mars, the terrestrial planets. Then we have the next ones out are called the gas giants. No one has a satisfactory explanation as to why they're all so different. Not only are the terrestrial planets different from each other, they're absolutely mind-boggling night and day difference between the gas ones, and the gas ones are different from each other, but they all occurred at the same time from the same event, this infinitesimal explosion of the Big Bang. So then, if it all happened from the same event, the same material, why are they so different? Not one shred of a really good explanation exists. That's what I mean. They shouldn't even be there in some cases. So we're going to start with the terrestrial planets. This is the closest one to the sun, the first one, Mercury. And we're just going to talk a little bit of what you're not being told. First of all, you're not being told that the core of Mercury, the magnetic field that's driving it, based on every single model, should not even be there, should not work. The core is totally baffling. And by the way, we are now, the Voyager space probe, went out, and we have been able to get probes into these planets and into the gas giants, and every single prediction that was made by the scientists as to the type of atmosphere, as to the type of terrain, every single one without exception was wrong. Once we actually got there and found what it really was made of, it totally baffled the scientists, and it was in direct contradiction to everything they had been teaching me and told me that it was fact. And then once they get there, they say, well, that's how science works. Well, that's true. But shouldn't you say this is what we believe, and there might be some other alternatives? Not, this is how it is, this is a fact, don't question it. This is out of from Dr. S.R. Taylor from Solar System Evolution, A New Perspective, page 194. The driving force behind previous attempts to account for the planet Mercury has been to fit the high density of the planet into some preferred overall solar system scheme. Now, how does that work as an empirical definition? It has become clear that none of these proposed models work. And the high density is conveniently accommodated by what? The large impact hypothesis. See, like I said, when scientists we cannot, they accuse us Christians of being simplistic, and we try to account for the layers of the earth and the crust based on a worldwide flood, which is exactly what it fits. You can't resort to this catastrophe, but in every single instance, the scientific community resorts to a catastrophe. The large impact. What you're not being told about Mercury is that Mercury should not have a liquid core and no magnetic field. But it does. Mercury's magnetic field is decaying rapidly and indicates a young planet. So once we were able to get the probes, get the material in there, it goes in direct contradiction to what we were being told. And see, here's what I was saying. Evolutionists evoke catastrophes over and over again to explain their models with little or no actual evidence to support the claim. Here's their magic bullet.
So evolutionists needed something new. Sure enough, a new theory soon came to the rescue.
So when all else fails, they resort to this, the large impact. Theory says Mercury should not have the core, no magnetic field. This is another article from, and like I said, I tried to condense this down. There's at least 10 or 15 articles per planet that say the same thing. That indicates, it says it should have no magnetic field, but it does. Chemical condensation models indicate that sulfur cannot condense in the primordial solar nebula at the heliocentric distance of Mercury, but it did. The heliocentric distance, don't you like that word? Everybody knows what that is, right? That's just the distance from the sun. See, when all else fails, we resort to terminology. Try to baffle the students with terminology instead of facts. So, according to evolution, if Mercury were billions of years old, evolution states this. Mercury can't be dense, but it is. Mercury can't have a magnetic field, but it does. Volatile elements discredit the solar nebular model. Magnetism and geological activity make it look young. Mercury is not the planet described in the science textbooks. But that's not stopping the teachers from pounding it into the students. See, that's why I love this, 1 Corinthians 1:27. But God has chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise. And God has chosen the weak things of the world to confound the things which are mighty. That's the name of my ministry, Confound the Wise. Because every step of the way, I was confounded. So that was Mercury. So what are we not being told about Venus? Same thing. It has a core that does not fit. It should not be there. It goes against every scientific model that has been put forth. Venus is extremely hostile. And so here on Mercury, or on Venus, it rains sulfuric acid. This is a planet that was condensed out of the same material as Mercury, Earth, and Mars. Why then is it so different? Because God spoke them into existence and made them different for a reason. What you're not being told about Venus. Venus is the hottest planet in our solar system. The average temperature is 900 degrees Fahrenheit. The entire planet is covered with CO2. Its surface is not at all what scientists expected when they got there. There are no tectonic plates and no magnetic field, and the entire planet appears young. And so how do they account for this? With this.
So evolutionists needed something new. Sure enough, a new theory soon came to the
A
rescue.
new theory. This solves everything. The large impact hypothesis. That is their explanation of how Venus got to be what it is. What about Earth? Earth is baffling to the scientific community. The models do not fit. Evolutionists still can't figure out why Earth has a magnetic field at all. The magnetism for generating the geomagnetic field remains one of the central unsolved problems in geoscience, according to the report from the National Geometric Initiative Commission on Geoscience. What? One of the central unsolved problems. But yet the students are being taught this is fact and it's proven. We now are going to get the Nobel Prize because of what? Because of what somebody has interpreted, somebody's faith, somebody's belief. Everything about the earth causes grief to the scientific community. If the earth were billions of years old, and see, that's one of the reasons I wanted to do the solar system and the cosmos. Because, folks, if we can't even prove the cosmos is old, then why are we so stuck on the earth? Must be. And I see Christians, well, just look at it. It must be billions of years old. How do you figure that? If the cosmos isn't old, then how can the planets be old? The Earth's magnetic field is losing about 1/2 of its magnetic field every 1,400 years. So let's put that into the 4.5 billion year scenario, folks, and what happens? It says, this is almost as much of a puzzle now as it was when William Gilbert, look at the date on this, in 1603 wrote his classic text considering magnetic bodies and the great magnet in Earth. So since the 1600s, folks, we know still less than nothing. But it's being taught as if we knew everything. So I just turned back to God. What does God say about it all? You know, all evolutionary models, look at this, say there should be no water on Earth. But that's not what we see. In fact, you'll see the scientists in Astronomy magazine, they're talking about how they're demanding that Mars had to have been subject to a global, all-encompassing flood. A planet where liquid water is impossible is supposed to be subjected to a worldwide flood, but a planet where we're mostly water, we can't evoke a worldwide flood. That's a little bit hypocritical. Taken together with the signature of the volatiles, those are the gases in the things in the Earth, these data suggest, now, see, one of the hypotheses for why, remember, the models say that we shouldn't have water on Earth. But since we have so much water, scientists try to explain, well, it came from comets and large impacts. These data suggest that no more than 50% and probably less than 18% of Earth's water could have been added from space at the end of our planet's formation. The scientists themselves say that it was impossible. But it's here. What you're not being told about Earth is how uniquely designed for life it is, the anthropic principle. It shouldn't have any water, and the magnetic field appears to be young, not millions and billions of years. But the students aren't even given this information. But remember I said, when you build these computer models, you can get any result you want. One of the things that is occurring is creation scientists are having to go through horrendous obstacles to get our hands on the actual material. We had to go through the Freedom of Information Act. Dr. John Sanford, who is a geneticist from Cornell University, he and a team of scientists spent 3.5 years going over the Human Genome Project. And 4 of the scientists involved in this research have 2 PhDs. 3.5 years of a very intense, extensive research on the Genome Project that got the Nobel Prize and your dollars paid for. Francis Collins' team was invited to the White House. They made all this big fuss, and when they were picking your pocket for the money to do the research, they were telling you it was going to cure Alzheimer's, autism, old age, it was going to cure cancer, everything. And then when they finished and they got the Nobel Prize, it went dead silent. When's the last time you heard anything about the Human Genome Project? So they had to go through the Freedom of Information Act to get their hands on the actual project. And like I said, it took 3.5 years. And what they found is absolutely mind-numbing. It absolutely, empirically falsifies Darwinian evolution. That's why this book is not reviewed by the scientific community. They don't want you to know it exists. Well, the same thing happened with the ice cores. Dr. Larry Vardaman and Russ Humphreys, a lot of science had to go through the Freedom of Information Act. They weren't allowed to get their hands on the actual ice cores until finally we could. And what we found was a little bit different than what we were being told. It does not fit an old age. The same thing on the fossils. Creation scientists were only given plaster or fiberglass models of the fossils. They had to sue, and when Dr. Marvin Lubenow got his hands on the actual fossils, like of Lucy and Australopithecines, they could see the file marks in the places where they had been ground down to make them fit and look like they do. You see, that's what's not being told to the students. But when you build these models, if you do not have a constant, then you do not have an accurate model. But this entire article in here, This entire article in National Geographic in this paper talks about supercomputers and the models and how the models are showing this based on what? The people who built the model. Not on the evidence. A team of Australian scientists led by theoretical physicist Paul Davies has proposed that the speed of light may not be a constant. Well, they have now found, in fact, in this article, it talks about that infinitesimal minute, right after the Big Bang exploded, that the speed of light was as much as 10 to the 70th power faster. What would that do to the distance and the millions of light years? If it slowed down from 10 to the 70th power faster, even if it went that way, it was coming this way. It's just bizarre. The speed of light is not a constant. And Paul Davies and his team are just one of many now that have found that the speed of light has slowed down. Of course, they're saying, well, it's slowed down only minutely. Well, that might be what we see now, but what was it in the past? But what about all of the constants of nature? Look at this. Public confidence in the constants of nature may be in an all-time low. This is out of USA Today. Research has found evidence that the value of certain fundamental parameters, such as the speed of light or the material that holds the invisible glue, the dark matter and dark energy, may have been different in the past. Oh, no kidding. There is absolutely no reason these constants should be constant, says astronomer Michael Murphy of the University of Cambridge. These are famous numbers in physics, but we have no real reason for why they are what they are. You see, the scientists know this. The students are not being told. The teachers are not being told. That's why we need to get this information out there, folks. Not that the students need to get into big arguments or scientific discussions with professors or teachers. What you just need to know is that, when I was out there promoting that, I was the one that was deceived and misguided. So you pray for them. I was the one that was lost, not my Christian students. And so you don't have to get in debates and arguments. You just need to know that there's more to the story. And everything appears to be young. The fact that we're in a spiral galaxy is totally devastating to billions of years. Spiral galaxies should not exist after just a couple of million years. I love this one, though. It was in the Astronomy magazine. It says, if you set out to construct a perfect galaxy, if you were to create a perfect galaxy, well, I think our Creator knew exactly what He was doing. You'd be hard-pressed to design anything better than M74 in the constellation Pisces the Fish. This spiral galaxy is called what? The Grand Design Galaxy. Every time I looked into a microscope as a scientist, as a biological science, I had to walk away and convince myself that what I was looking at wasn't designed. You'd think I would have got a hint. Because every time I looked at it, it screamed design. But we are to be told and believe that it happened from a massive explosion over billions of years. No intelligence necessary. There could be anti-people and anti-galaxies somewhere else. I mean, if we didn't laugh at it, it's hard not to become frustrated. So I love this. John 3:12. If I have told you earthly things and you believe not, how shall you believe if I tell you of the heavenly things? As I said this morning, preaching the Bible to me was foolishness until you have the Holy Spirit to decipher it for you. Spiral galaxies should not exist if the universe is billions of years old, even if it were mega millions. Here is the definition of science according to the National Academy of Science. It says science is a particular way of knowing about the universe, the world. In science, explanations are limited to those based on observations and experiments that can be substantiated by other scientists. Explanations that cannot be based on empirical evidence are not a part of science. Does everybody follow that? I didn't just make that up. That's out of the National Academy of Science. According to their own definition, by the way, they came up with that definition to keep creation out of the classroom. They call it metaphysics. It's not science. It's not empirical. Now, I asked a whole room full of scientists 2 questions. One was, how do we date fossils? And they told me carbon-14, and that just stumped me, since we know carbon-14 cannot date fossils. It's never been used to date fossils. It can only date artifacts, real carbon-based items, bone, wood. It can't date rock. But yet, I have students tell me, well, scientists carbon dated this dinosaur 65 million years. No, that's a flat impossibility. Carbon can only give you dates within a short time frame, not millions of years, and it can't date the rock. But I had a whole room full of scientists tell me carbon could do it. I spoke to 600 scientists in one auditorium down in Southern California. And I asked them that question. But the next question I asked them, I showed them this definition. And you can get the National Academy of Science at any college bookstore, by the way, if you want to go through it. So I asked them, after I showed them this, I said, can anybody in this room give me just one empirical piece of evidence to support Darwinian evolution? The whole room was silent. They couldn't give me one, folks. But their own explanation says if it's not empirical, it's not part of science. Do you see how hypocritical that is? Let's just call them both what they are, faith-based religions, and teach it all. Because how would you possibly empirically prove the Big Bang? How would you possibly prove spontaneous generation from a primordial soup? Even though it's been tried in the classroom and in the field, but you certainly couldn't have been there to empirically prove it. But I want to make sure, so I looked up the word empirical, and here's what it says. Originating in or based on observation or experience, relying on experience or observation, capable of being verified or disproved. That's Merriam-Webster Dictionary. That's from their own definition. But see, what I didn't realize until after I became a Christian is that I, as a hardcore anti-Christian humanist, believed in a miracle. See, I believed in that first miracle, that life spontaneously generated from non-life. Because we know the law of biogenesis, life begets life. You do not get life from a chemical process. So I believed in that first miracle. But that's okay. See, I could have my miracle, but the Christians can't. See, that's just absurd. So if it's not empirical, then folks, it is a miracle. And here's my definition of a miracle. A miracle is defined as an event that happens outside any known natural law. For example, healing a leper, changing water into wine, and restoring life to a dead body certainly qualify for miracle status. In a like manner, the spontaneous formation of life from a soup of chemicals also qualifies for miracle status, for this event too lies outside any known natural law. See, their own definition comes back to bite them. So how do we determine what's a fact and what's an opinion? Well, I'm going to make you all scientists. And we're going to go on this great expedition. And you're going to be led by this great scientist, me. And we're going to do this. We're out in the field, and we find this fact. Well, what do we have to do when we find this fact or this fossil? We have to determine what it was, what's missing. So what's missing from this? Now, when I did this with thousands of people, it was pretty cool. It came out pretty accurate. But we're going to do it with you. I'm going to ask you. We had to determine, what was it originally? What was this originally? See, because I hear people say, well, the majority of scientists believe this. So is that how we do science? By majority vote? Or by the evidence? Well, that's not true, because we do, well, the majority of scientists believe the Big Bang, so it must be true. Well, let's try something. I already know what I want that to be, and I want to publish my findings. So I have this, all of you are scientists. How many of you think it was A? Raise your hand. Let me see. I want to count. We always have at least one. Not in this audience. How about B? How many think it was B? Hold your hands up, because I'm going to count. Well, the huge majority believe it was B. How about C? All right, we got some thinkers outside the box. We got a couple of those. How about D? All right. E. Right, F. See, that's the way it should be. Based on what you know, but see, the thing is, what is the best way to find out what that was, folks? How would you empirically prove it? You would have to have, what? Been there when it was created, or you ask the person who drew it, and I had that happen to me. I had one young lad in one of my lectures. He said, well, Dr. Oliver, what did you draw it as? Well, I told him. That's the best way, is to have been there when it occurred. But see, here's the deal. If I wanted to publish my paper and I wanted it to be B, I can publish my paper saying, team of scientists led by great scientist Rick Oliver found B. Yes, because the overwhelming majority supports it. Based on what? Opinion. Because if you had asked me what it was, I would have showed you. It was exactly what I drew it as. But you see, we can't do science by vote. That's what empirical is. You have to be there. That's why when you see a headline like this, it must be fixed or replaced, you should ask the question, why would you fix it or replace it? Colossians 1:16-17. For him all things were created that were in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible. See, that tells me that it wasn't dark matter, dark energy. God told me right from the get-go. And see, science knows this. And you know that God tells me in his word that there are just some things that I don't know and that we as scientists will never know. I'll tell you, that was a hard test for me as a scientist. To come to, because as I was drilled that if we don't know it, we will. No. But see, the scientific community knows that's not true. Look right on the cover, limits of our knowledge. There are things we can never understand, but the students aren't told that. But the scientists know it. But see, then you get that, as a scientist, as a teacher, I don't believe in any such thing as a dumb question, but there's one that gets really close. And I'm asked that question every week. And the question usually starts off, excuse me, Dr. Oliver, couldn't God have used evolution? We'll talk about a close question. Yeah, what is it God can't do? God is God. See, first of all, the question is formed wrong. It should be, did God use evolution? If you ask it properly, now you can go to his word. And you ask, did God use evolution? Well, first of all, he says we are created in his image, not in the image of a protozoan. So, therefore, that should tell you. But 1 Corinthians 15:39 tells me right off, it should end the question. All flesh is not the same flesh, but there's one kind of flesh of men, another flesh of beasts, another of fishes, and another of birds. End of discussion. Could God use evolution? Absolutely, he's God. But did God use evolution? No. And see, God, by his character, cannot sin. He cannot lie. So then why is it we put our faith in man's word where man will lie and does lie? It's absurd. But let's get back. We hit the earth. One of the things that is seldom talked about to the students, not only does Earth itself, the physical planet, not fit as an old Earth planet in this young solar system, young cosmos, but the moon itself is an enigma. It should not exist. And it's interesting, too, because the scientists, when they prepared to land on the moon, remember they were thinking there were going to be 30, 60 feet of dust. There wasn't enough dust on it. Plus, we know that the moon, we can measure, because the scientists, when they landed on the moon, left behind these LLR reflectors. So NASA, from the ground, now can zero in a laser on those reflectors, and they can measure the exact distance. And they can now know how the Earth or the moon is moving away from the Earth. Based on the distance that the moon is from, which is absolutely perfect. See, the sun is 400 times larger than the moon. But the moon is 400 times further away, which is absolutely perfect, or you would never see a solar eclipse. And a solar eclipse allows us to study things about the sun that you could not know if we didn't have the eclipse. But the moon, based on its current movement today, if it were millions of years old, would have been touching the earth just a few million years ago, much less billions. And that would have been impossible. But first of all, the moon supposedly was created at the same time, but it's so different. Well, don't worry. We have an explanation.
So evolutionists needed something new. Sure enough, a new theory soon came to the rescue.
That explains it. So shut up, students. There it is. I mean, that's basically it. Our moon is 400 times smaller than the sun, and the sun is 400 times further away from the moon. This allows us to see a total solar eclipse. This is no mere coincidence. It is perfect. There are three dominant theories for the origin of the moon. The fission theory, which is that it occurred with that solar nebula, or an explosion hit, which is that large impact. The solar nebula theory, that it was created from that same condensing, the blast of the Big Bang, or the capture theory, that it just was cruising by and Earth reached out and grabbed it. None of those are mathematically, scientifically possible. In spite of everything we have learned during the past few years, we still cannot decide between these three theories. We still need more data. And perhaps some new theories before the origin of the moon is settled to everyone's satisfaction. But I thought we had proven everything. But see, that's just our moon. There are moons out there on these other planets that are totally absurd and totally devastating to the Big Bang theory. And if we had time, on that DVD, by the way, that little clip that I think that's from there, all of this is from there, and it goes into detail. That's why it takes hours. See, here's astronauts left behind those LLR reflectors, which allow to measure. And it says, the moon is moving away from the Earth at about 1.5 inches per year at present, but it would have been moving away much faster in the past because of the initial expansion and the Big Bang. So they estimate that in just 1.5 billion years ago, the moon would have been touching the Earth, which would have been impossible. But yet, we're told it's 4.5 billion, 15 billion, 14.5 billion for the universe. You see how none of it fits? We just assign these dates because we put into the computer and realize that, in fact, I tell the students that the cosmos is several billion years older than it was when I was in high school. I didn't feel like I've aged that much. Because now with the computers, they realized there wasn't enough seconds in the universe for spontaneous generation or for some of these things to have occurred. So what's the magic answer? Given enough time. You see, not evidence, it's somebody's interpretation, somebody's opinion. So what you're not being told about the moon is evolutionists can't explain its origin. Evolution can't explain its geological activity, and it can't explain ghost craters, which the moon is full of, and I'll show you a picture of it. And it can't explain its recession. Evolution can't explain why the moon is even there. But the students don't know this. These are ghost craters, craters within a crater. That's impossible if it's as old as they say it is. Well, we've gone through Mercury, Venus, Earth. Let's try Mars. What are we not being told about Mars? Pretty much the same thing. The core does not fit everything we know. And, we've got some pretty good evidence on the Mars. We've got rovers on there. We've been able to really do some pretty good science. And it is not one single piece of evidence fits what we predicted before we landed on Mars. Not one. What you're not being told about Mars is that liquid water is not possible on Mars. But evolutionists demand that water once covered the entire planet. That's just mind-boggling. So Mars is a great example of wild speculation passed off as fact. Guys, we have just covered I want to hit one of the gas giants and we'll finish up here. But we've just covered, this has just been synopsis, little bits. But do you get the drift? Do you see from the very science itself, from the science literature, from the scientific papers, the research from all of the top scientists in the field, not one shred of evidence supports an old solar system or an old Earth. Not one. Jupiter is absolutely mind-boggling. It is so, again, first of all, Jupiter is the king of the planets. It shouldn't even exist according to all of the models. Jupiter is the largest planet in our solar system, made up entirely of gases. Why? If it happened at the same time out of the same event, the red spot right here on Jupiter is larger than the entire planet of Earth. But see, it remains to be shown, this is again, Jupiter, the planet satellites, this is out of University Press. It remains to be shown how planetesimals that formed at the very low temperatures required to explain their observations could have found their way to Jupiter. That's a very nice way of saying it doesn't fit and there's no model that says it fits. Jupiter is by far the largest of all planets, but it results in Nature magazine now reveal, look at this, the embarrassing fact that we know next to nothing about how or where it formed. That's out of Nature magazine. Talk about your major embarrassment for planetary scientists. There blazing away in the evening sky are Jupiter and Saturn, the gas giants that account, look at this, for 93% of the entire solar mass. Those two planets account for 93% of that, only 7% for all the other planets and all the rest of the solar system. And no one has a satisfying explanation of how they were made. But the students don't know this. The teachers don't know this. What you're not being told about Jupiter is the evolutionary models say Jupiter should not even exist. No planetesimals were available to form Jupiter in the first place. Jupiter's moon, Ganymede, should not have a magnetic field, but it does. We just go on and on. So hopefully you've been able to gather just a little bit of understanding that if we cannot come to an agreement, the scientists, the scientific community, on the age of the universe, of the solar system, then why is it we're so certain that the earth is so old? And why do so many Christians fall for it? See, because if the earth, that theistic evolution is that God created everything, and that he created that first life, and then he periodically, throughout millions of years, stepped in and helped it out. An awful lot of Christians buy into it. Theistic evolution is more damaging, more dangerous to the students than evolution itself. Because you are messing where God says, do not mess. Do not add to or take away from his word. And if the earth, if there was this pre-Adamic race, soulless race, and by the way, none of the theistic evolutionists will allow for a worldwide flood either. It was a localized flood. Now think about that one. Then that means Noah was an idiot. Because how far can you walk in 120 years? Why build the boat? It just doesn't make sense. But here's the other problem. If we had millions of years, hundreds of years, thousands of years of death and suffering before the original sin in the garden, what was the cross all about? See, that's why we've got to be careful. We've got to set the foundation. You can't have it both ways. And what does God say about walking the fence? And see, that's what I did. I kept trying to bring God down to fit in my box to make it, God could have done this because I was so concerned about how the world saw me. But let me tell you, I'm blessed because of folks like you. My wife and I can come out and we can do this. But I have friends that are terrified that they'll be found out, that they're Christians or creationists, who are trying to put their kids through college and afraid of losing their job. If you saw the movie with Ben Stein, Expelled, No Intelligence Necessary, you see what happens to people that aren't even Christians who go against the Darwinian, this long age theory. I have friends that are involved in lawsuits with universities because their son or daughter was denied entrance into the doctoral programs because of their belief, their Christian belief. See, they are so terrified, and it really upsets them that there are scientists out there like me and my friends. And by the way, there are thousands of us. I mean, my friend Kurt Weiss from Harvard, it goes on and on. It just devastates them. See, I used to dismiss it, my mother out, those Christians, they're not real scientists. And most of the time, the books she would send me were from some doctor of theology that wasn't a scientist. But guys, there are a lot of good, solid, quality scientists out there. And I've got a lot of good resources over there. The students need to know that God said what he meant and meant what he said. And that this is the most reliable source of information on the planet. And we don't have to compromise it. Lord, thank you for today. Thank you for these great folks here, Lord. And I just pray that you would use this material just to continue to glorify you. And that, Lord, that we could just reach the hearts and minds of the students so that they would know that they don't have to be intimidated. That you said what you meant and meant what you said. And that your word is true cover to cover. Lord, I thank you for this time. And I pray that you bless the folks here as they leave. And I thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.